This is not an angry black poem, though I'm angry and I'm black. This is more of a cry for all the black men who were never given permission to cry. For all the black boys tried as men who were taught not to feel by people who did not love them, who were taught not to feel by people who did. I know that I'm a black man. I've seen the reflection of my skin in the eyes of too many stares in my lifetime to forget. The first time I was taught how not to feel, I was 9 years young, my lungs still learning to breathe in America. That day, I witnessed the police talk down to my uncle like he wasn't a skyline, like I didn't look up to him, like he wasn't a king in baggy FUBU jeans with a smile that echoed the sound of war ending and peace rising from the ashes. I can recall my heart balling into a clenched fist, bare-knuckled aimed towards his reckless mouth, calling my uncle every name but the one my grandmother gave him. When the cop handed him back his driver's license, along with his dignity, the car ride home was a silent one. Tension filled our vehicle like thick fog. My uncle threw his smile in the back seat and his joy traveled somewhere distant. His face became an abandoned church on Sunday, and I was an awkward prayer sitting in the front seat, not knowing what to do with my body, so I mimicked his mad. I figured if we had the same growl on our face, he would remember that I was his kin. Later that evening, he sits me down and talks to me about what to do when I'm stopped by the police. His voice, serious as a siren howling through the projects. It was then when I realized that this is not the first time his smile was arrested for no reason. But what was sad is that he did not talk to me about how he felt, about where he hid his anger when we got home, about the pain still a river rising in his eyes from the first time the police beat him because his skin blended too well with midnight past curfew. He just carried on his day. Like being harassed by the police was normal because in his world it was. In his world, no one ever gave him permission to feel. In his world, he was treated numb and then was accused of being numb. 3 years later, on one tragic night in Chicago, my uncle lost his smile for good when a bullet missed a crowd of folk and landed in his skull. I remember his funeral like it was this morning. He laid still as a night star in the casket. I pressed my curious fingers against his lifeless body. He was cold, hard, numb, void of emotion, just like his environment taught him to be when he was alive. Groups of women in my family took turns screaming in unison like a choir of grieving mothers. But all the men in my family sat in the pews, still as stone, trying not to crumble, pretending not to be broken. They were also lifeless. The only difference between their faces and my dead uncle was the occasional tears escaping their eyes like runaway slaves down the field of their cheeks. There is no scene sadder than hurting men, afraid to be hurting men in public. The second time I was taught how not to feel, it was during his repast. My heart was still confetti, still learning the beats of the rhythm of my uncle being gone. My older cousin, who experienced too many deaths in his young life, said, "Boy, why are you still crying? Don't you know it's time for you to be strong for your family? Your mother doesn't need a weak man in the house at this time." My tear ducts dried up and became a deserted land. And in all my years, the men in my life have taught me that my emotions is a disease, because where I'm from, showing the wrong emotions might get you killed, or worse, you will live in the shame of being human. For so long, I thought my emotions were weakness. It took 2 years into my marriage for my wife to see me cry once, and when she did, I thought I failed her. I thought she doesn't need a weak man in the house at this time. She doesn't need a husband so human. The first time I was taught how to feel, I was in counseling. I was sitting on a chair that felt nothing like home. My heart was sitting on my lap, bare and bleeding, vulnerable for the first time. I was processing my soul to a trained therapist who knows God and knows broken people like me well. She said, "Preston, you have been set free from your sin, but you haven't been set free from the sins others committed against you," she said. "I'm here to help you be set free from the lies of your childhood," she said. "Being able to mourn properly is a gift from God that you are afraid to receive." And I see now that a man mourning doesn't make him weak. It keeps him alive. It keeps his insides from becoming a funeral, When grief comes out, it makes room for life to come in. For so long, I've been holding my breath in fear that breathing will make me look like less of a man. Not considering the God who made my lungs or the air that feeds them. Where I'm from, no one points us in the direction of counseling. So what are we to do with all this trauma trapped in our bodies? This last year, God has shown me that it's not just his job to make me his, but he's using therapy to make me whole. This is the end of the poem, because I don't have this emotion thing all figured out yet. But I know one day God will complete the work that he started in me. And on that day, I will smile like no one's watching. I will laugh like I found a fistful of joy. And I will cry. Y'all, I will cry whenever I feel like it. Who gives a black man permission to feel? Jesus has. Jesus will. Thank y'all.